Shalom, shalom. Hi, Joshua. Hi, Teresa. How are you? Everybody's good? Joshua, how are you good at class coming along?
It's going really well. It's going very fast, but going very well.
Very good. Good to hear it. Okay, so we kind of jumped right into the prophets as literature, and we did the idea of a parable as a teaching method. There's a couple others that we'll do here in lessons 21 and 22 that are called rebuke and consolation. And they go together. That's the key, is there's not like at least from everything we can tell. It's not like they are completely separate um, areas. They're just the opposites of each other, and they've been collected differently. We have different editors for the prophetic collections, and some of them will put all the prophecies of rebuke together and separate them from the prophecies of consolation. But from what we can tell, they worked together. In other words, the consolation follows the rebuke. So the rebuke is sort of the warning, and then the consolation says, after the punishment is over, some people will survive, and here's, a more glorious future for them, or a respectable recovery for them. So we'll talk about the methods of doing the rebuke using Hoy and where that might come from, and then the next lesson we'll spend time on those conciliatory, messages that would not be. See, they're not, I think the right way to put it is they're not contingent on anything. It's not like if you follow or heed the warning, then you get the consolation prize. It's the punishment's coming either way, which is always a hard thing for us to get our heads around, that they're hearing a warning that they really didn't understand and wouldn't be able to prepare for. But because it's out there, the warning's out there, the consolation message says once it's all said and done, there will be recovery. So there's hope at the end of the tragedy. So we should see them in connection with each other, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, there's a advertisement here. Let me cursor to apply. That if you know of anybody who wants to take Hebrew, you get a perk for introducing them to our classes. All right, here's some vocabulary work. Joshua, why don't you get us started with that?
Yeah, we have enav, which is grape, uh, gader, a stone wall. Uh, they give us yekev, the wine vat, the wine press. Chatzev, the to dig, to hew out, and then shever, a break or a fracture.
From the verb you already know, to break. Shavar. All right. Teresa?
Means emptiness or desolation, probably.
That's a good question. Let's see
Um,
what they are
or no,
giving me.
vanity, vanity. Lashav is in vain. So, shav, vanity, musar, discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Vela is the lowland. Mishor, plain, and shmama, desolation.
Yeah, so shamam, I think you have learned that iodine root as a destruction word, so that makes sense for this noun. Mishor from the root yashar, which can be upright and straight and right path kind of language. But here it's sort of like horizontal straightness to describe a feature of the land. Now, shifela also from the root shafal, to below, but it describes sort of a land that's not completely low. This is not what they call the area by the sea, but it's the area as you come out of the mountains, down the wadi, infected area where there's all that runoff from the hills creates these big hollows in the side of the hill. Just as you pan out from that, they refer to that area as the Shifel. in several places within the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so we're going to go to Isaiah 5 for our prophecy of woe, and I think we go to Jeremiah for our consolation. So they don't always know how they work together, but they have a couple of examples where they're delivered together, and therefore we think that they were meant to be understood in a connection. So our prophecy of hoy or woe or warning is going to come by way of sort of a borrowed mechanism. The prophets are good at borrowing from other genres and from other various parts of life to make practical their teachings. The dominant one is, of course, the messaging formulae. Thus says the Lord, the utterance of God, something like that. You can find those said about the king. So we know how they understood themselves, that they are messengers delivering the words of the divine message. But with woe, they seem to be borrowing from the world of mourning. So our poem opens with hoy, and then we'll get a chance to maybe get some idea of how hoy might have been used in the laments, if you will. Joshua, will you read for us out of verse 11?
Yeah. Excuse me. Hoi mashkeme baboker shekar yirdofu me'acharei baneshif ayin yaldikem.
Good. And yirdofu, if you noticed, it's got a vowel that you normally don't see, yirdofu. So if we had, which they will be doing in the new kind of revamping of the curriculum, if we had the ta'mim here, you would notice that your atnach is here. Your dofu, early stress,
Okay.
vowel that's I had a teacher called the resurrected vowel because he called the Shiva the ashes of a dead vowel, and then he would talk about pausal forms as the resurrected vowel. Anyway, I loved it. So stress early on it, and so it sounds and looks a little different than you're used to, but it's a good example of pausal formation. Okay, give us a translation.
Woe to those rising early in the morning, who are pursuing beer, strong drink, and who tarry in twilight. Something like that. Wine may inflame them, may cause burning in them. I'm guessing an idiom for getting drunk with wine.
Yeah, good. So let's think of this in the halves that they give us with the atnach here, that we have a participle doing the ones who. It's double marked. So we've talked about this in poetry, how you can put the construct formation on a preposition. So it's called the double marking of the genitive, or it's almost like they get a twofer. They get the prepositional idea plus the construct idea, and it seems to go against what is the rules of grammatical form in prose. But that's the opening. The ones who do this in the morning, and getting up early in the morning is a regular phrase. So there may be some, idiomatic features here that just come more naturally here to the poet, wherein the construct form on the preposition makes some bit of sense. And then the Yirdofu agrees with that. So they are the ones. They're the ones who get up early in the morning, but then that's not who the warning goes out to, just somebody who's industrious and gets up in the morning. But the ones who get up in the morning and who Radaf chase after. So they must be pretty interested in it, must be pretty dedicated to it, to chase after it early in the morning, to go for it. So we could even say that second half is like a relative clause describing the mashkime. So you've got the warning going out to the mashkime baboker who do this, the ones that regularly, the yetol might give you that sort of regular timing. And then in your second half, you've got these comparisons. Ma'achare baneshef, they're double marking that one as well. And So just like the ones who get up early in the morning, these are the ones who stay up late at night, right? The tarrying achar, the aftering people, they are staying up late, but then there's a little linguistic shift that you had a little trouble translating, like trying to figure out how do we do this? But it's partly because they didn't do it the same way as they did in the first line. So woe to the ones who, the second line is also woe to the ones who, but our switch is that Sechar is not the subject of Radaf. It's still the people who get up early. But Yayin is the subject of Dalak. And the referent back to Ma'achare Baneshef is the pronoun at the end, Yadli Hem. So you could, maybe make the case that this is a switch of subject. It's not exactly subject object that you were seeing in the examples for that lesson, but it's a nice little switch here at the end that I love, because now we have, by the end of the day, the wine is going after them. It's kind of a nice little switch. They pursued it in the morning, but now it pursues them late into the night. I don't know. Do you like that? I also love, I think they give us BDB. I love the way BDB translates, and I don't know what text they're working off, but look at how they translate Dalak in the he feel, inflame, subject wine. That's ours here, but I like this up here, way at the top. That's not, considered associated with um, any one verse. They've got the translation hotly pursue. So they know something about burning, but our text is about radafing. There's some sort of connection between the going after, the chasing down. So I think our hotly pursue is particular to our Isaiah passage, but I haven't checked all the others to see if they find this regularly used, or if this is the kind of the innovation of our poet. But I think it's a wonderful little switch of grammar that adds a little spice to the poem. And that makes it maybe a little easier to translate once you see how that switch works. Maybe it doesn't. Harder. Makes it harder, maybe. Okay. Anything else about the style of the poetry, the use of neshef? I don't think we see that very often, for end of day words, twilight, night words, and so on. Okay, then let's turn to the genre issue of Hoy. So we're not going to Jeremiah here for a Hoy text, but there's a quotation in this other text that the prophet is talking about, and it seems to be a clear indication where he's maybe talking about a king and talking about the king's death, and anticipating that no one will mourn for him, or at least not mourn for him in the way that they would normally mourn. And so in the middle of that, he's quoting what people might say, maybe at a funeral, right? So we get Hoy texts, we get Hoy in texts that are lament passages. You have to look in the Book of Lamentations. But this is really the only place where we have somebody that appears to be quoting what might be said at a funeral or in the context of a mourning occasion. So got to take it for how they're presenting it. Teresa, will you read and translate for us?
לכן כה אמר אדוני אל יהויקים בן יאשיהו מלך יהודה, לא יספדו לו הוי אחי והוי אחות, לא יספדו לו הוי אדון והוי הודו.
Good.
Therefore, thus says the Lord, and thus says Adonai, to Jehoiakim, or
And it might be
concerning?
about concerning, because so many times we don't know what the prophet is speaking to in particular, but we get the impression that there were certain divinations sought, and there were certain divinations that were very pointed. This message about this occasion, this message about this person. So this is just one of those times when a very specific message has come down about a king.
Okay, so the Lord, thus says the Lord about Jehoiakim, son of Yoshiyahu, the king of Judah. He will not be, or they will not lament him.
Good.
Hoi achi, like, oh my brother, oh my sister. They
Yeah,
won't
so it's kind of funny
lament.
that in the context of Jehoiakim, they're bringing in hoi achi, but also hoi achot. So it's almost like they're pulling out a quotation maybe from a song or from a poem or from a commonly used phrase with all of the potential um, topics of mourning.
And they won't lament him, Hoi Adon, O Lord, or alas, Lord, O his splendor.
That sounds like something that you'd say about a king. Be first to a family member. We know how ach can be pretty broad. So just any kind of male family member, you'd say hoi achi. Any kind of female family member, hoi achot. But the second one certainly would say something about a royal funeral, where you might, or a funeral of a person who had a lot of sway, a lot of power. Hoi adon, and then hoi ohodo. I can't imagine anybody but a king getting that kind of reference. But with that quote taken into account, said about a king who's, there's some trouble in that period for, and Jeremiah speaking specifically to it. This is the house of Josiah just getting picked off one after another. Josiah gets killed. His son comes to the throne. Necho pops him off the throne, puts someone, one of his cousins, and then the Babylonians come in and make a change, and it just starts boom, boom, boom. All of them are related. They're all Josianic, but they're just, sitting on the throne for very short periods of time until it all kind of comes down um, to the breach of the walls of Jerusalem. Anyway, so we're taking it out of that context to try to understand the quotation so that we can try to understand the use of hoi by Isaiah, but also by many of our prophets who have this formula at their disposal to make set out a warning that says that the proper response to God is like akin to going into mourning at the loss already. Like it's coming and you already start preparing and reacting like it's happened already. Now, there's a story of Jonah that kind of tells you in almost a comical way that that's the expectation. It puts into context maybe the rest of the prophets who constantly are using lament terminology to describe and prepare for the disasters ahead. Um, but there it's like, okay, if you do this, God will change his mind. It's sort of got a real simplistic presentation, but nonetheless, it assumes that, actually doing morning things, how you dress, where you sit, what you do with your clothes, what you don't do with your armpits and your hair, all that stuff becomes a way to talk about, preparation for a disaster. So anyway, I think it's powerful. Whatever it is, it's very popular enough that it's a powerful start to the prophecy that wants to say, "Oh boy, you've, you know, alas, this is coming." So let's go on. Now, so far in our poem, we think that people who are drinking too much, is that really all it's about? I think we have more to learn as we go. So Joshua, will you take first of all, please?
והיה כנור ונבל תוף וכליל ועין משתיהם ואת פועל אדוני לא יביטו ומעשה ידיו לא ראו.
Yabitu, those Those Hifil forms have early stress.
Yeah,
It's
B2.
the only one
Okay.
that kind of goes again. Everyone else says Yiktalu, but Hifil says Yaktilu. All those early features are something only the Hifil accomplishes. All right, your translation.
Okay. Um, and there was in their banquet lyres, harps, tambourines or drums, something like that, flutes and wine.
Yeah, the
And
wine
but
is the only thing in the list that's
yeah,
not. So it is kind of important the past, which is the drinking all day and into the night, to now instruments, a whole list of instruments, and then wine, and using the word mishte, which is specifically sort of banqueting, drinking at the center of it.
okay.
And I don't know
Uh,
whether it's a katal or it's a vakatal. It's a good question. If the woe is going to the ones who do this all the time, if we work off of that yiktol in verse 11, then this could be a vakatal. And not only do they do that all day long, but there is in those same, people's lives, instruments and wine and parties, or at their parties. I kind of liked how you translated mishte.
okay. Um, but the deeds of Adonai they do not regard, and the works of his hands they do not observe.
Those singulars here, but yeah, I don't mind a plural translation here. The poel of God. So I love the but too. That's and the prepositioning of the object puts emphasis on it. That can be important. It's important in prose. Why not? Also in poetry. So here's where I angle on this. When I look out into the ancient Near East, and I see banqueting scenes and I read about banqueting going on in the Near East. It's always has to do with a god. Just never seen anything where people are partying and they're not doing it with the notions of deity. They're praising deities. There's holidays. There's events associated with myths and stories about deities that tend to like bring the party around or bring the celebration to a regular occurrence. Um, Even in mourning and lament, where you have houses of drinking for that, they're still drinking to the deities, even in those occasions. So I just don't see anything where people just have parties for the heck of it. Which may be what this is all about. This isn't about the drinking, maybe. This isn't about the instruments and the wine. It's about the doing all this and not doing it for the deity. Not they're not bringing in this. And in a minute, we're gonna sense that they're supposed to because they can. They have the capacity to teach the masses about the deity in the party, in the celebration. So maybe consider that as one of the possibilities for reading what's not happening in Isaiah's Jerusalem, or how he perceives what went on in Samaria. We've had conversations already about the variety of events that occur in the lifetime of this prophet. He's just there at a very critical era. He comes into his office as early as Ahaz, and Ahaz is the king of Judah who brought in Tiglath-Pileser III. He was getting threats from the northern kingdom's king and from Aram's king, and he handled the threats unlike Isaiah told him, just lay low and all this will go away and your enemies will be gone. He actually went and made a deal with the enemy, which probably some historians say brought Assyria ever closer sooner into the region. But by 732, Damascus is out, 721, Samaria is gone. And Isaiah is the palace prophet through all of that. And then he seems to resonate well, or they have a good relationship with Ahaz's son, Hezekiah, who actually experiences the surrounding of his capital city by the Assyrian army. By the hair on his chinny chin chin, he survives it. And the outcome is bleak right up until it's not. And then Jerusalem has a little bit of a break and a rebuilding time during the reign of Hezekiah. That's all Isaiah's life. Uh, and that's Isaiah of Jerusalem. That's not to mention the potential Isaiah 2 and 3 understood in the latter half. So this is just Isaiah 1 through 39, trying to understand the Isaiah who lived in the time of the Assyrian crisis in Jerusalem. So there's a lot of directions we could point to how he might be taught. Who are these people? Are they in Jerusalem? Are they somebody they could have observed in Samaria who did this and they've already witnessed the outcome there? But the point is somebody could throw parties and bring enlightened understandings to the masses with those parties about the Poal Adonai and the Maaseh of his hands. And they didn't, right? And they don't. Maybe the repetitiveness of the yictols will help us. Okay. So let's go on to 13. I think lachen here offers us a little bit of a change away from that metaphor that's been building. Teresa.
לכן גלה עמי מבלי דעת, וכבודו מטה רעב, והמונו שיחי צמא. Therefore, my people, they translated go into exile. Is this a perfect propheticum then? Because
Yeah, for some it
Katal,
might be that. Remember how I feel about the prophetic perfect. A katal already does this. It can say will have. I think the phenomenon is that the prophets use it the most. If it has that capacity and you get it occasionally on secondary clauses that follow yictols, it's not very often. But follow yictols and haven't occurred yet, so you have to employ that will have occurred effect. The prophets are all for the will have occurred in their visions and in their anticipation of these events. So it maybe isn't the phenomenon that some people characterize it to be only done in the prophets, but the prophets take advantage of the ability of the katal to carry that earlier than something else, even in the future effect. So you always have to make that decision. Yes, it's in the hands of a prophet, can be, it might be, but keep in mind how you think about Katal's potential and how a prophet might be exploiting Katal's potential. But I love that lachen. This is a real transition. If all the different words we've been talking about that are keys and alkans and atas, and there's just moments in the presentation, the rhetorical presentation of the prophet, when he's changing the tune and refining exactly what he's talking about. So up to this point, we're we're in this whirlwind of parties and wine and grand times. There was that little critical remark about no godly actions being celebrated, and now we're going to get what he's actually up to. Lachen.
would you translate, therefore my people will have gone into exile?
If we think it's Jerusalem, yeah, I think Isaiah doesn't experience exile, doesn't have his city does not experience exile. Isaiah 1, let's make that clear. Isaiah 1 does not have that experience, but he witnesses it happening in Samaria. So is he looking at Samaria and talking to Jerusalem saying, my people have already gone into exile? Or is he looking at the people and saying they will have gone into exile with the image the prophet presents? Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Um, מבלי דעת, for lack of knowledge, וכבודו מתי רעב, so their honor, I translated, their honored ones are dying of hunger.
So you're thinking moot.
Metim
Yeah, it's not
is,
uncommon for people to want to bring in moot, but with the Masoretes pointing it with the shva, they are just using the metim word, which is just bodies, people, men.
okay.
But yeah, I know the tendency, and you'd have to point it differently if you wanted to bring in moot here. You could put a tsere in there, mete, meti. I don't think that tsere, it might in construct reduce partially, but I don't think it would drop all together, especially if it could be confused with another word in construct. But we have what the Masoretes interpreted, so maybe it's just they're people of Ra'av. So if they're kavod, like you're thinking of like a collective kavod, these people should have plenty. They should be honored with weight, and they should never starve. They should never be without. People give them gifts all the time. That's maybe the opposite of miterav.
Okay, the honored ones are hungry, and their multitude is parched with thirst.
Yeah, so you have this collective kavod and hamon. Hamon's easy to see in a collective, from the root hamam, like the noise makes it a rowdy bunch of people. So population term, the people term, um, and we want to think of it as the opposite of kavod. Whatever you do, the kavod are the special, highlighted, lifted up, taken care of, honored group. The hamon is everybody else. But if these descriptions about the Mete Ra'av and Tzife Tzama, I can't help but think of the repetition of the Tzare as maybe, helpful. They are descriptions of the opposite of, kavod. And so even the kavod are starving and the population is thirsty. Now, it could go back to the fact that they're not taken care of. They're not, um, especially if the partiers aren't inviting the Hamon. That part I don't know, but it seems to be like a little criticism that the parties don't have the flavor of the teaching. And when I read Bli Da'at, that's the only thing I can think of. It's so soon after, that the Po'al of God and the Ma'aseh of God are not being recognized. Then I think that's the Da'at. If you have other ideas, I'd love to hear them. But if they are going off into exile, having never been taught about the greatness of God, this might be Samaria. This might be Isaiah's view of like an exile where identity is lost because they're not going into exile with a good sense of their loyalties or their national identity or whatever that might mean. Anyway, so they're in tandem. I don't know that there's any difference between them, but yeah, I wonder what Mate is actually doing. Are they just bodies? So yeah, the Katal does concern us. Is it going to happen? It will have happened? Is this sort of like the design of the prophet's images that he receives via via a a vision. So one of the things we can say is we didn't start this with "Thus says the Lord." So we know that's the messaging presentation, and so we know that when that comes, either that or you got the one at the end where utterance of God follows as a closer. Both of those are clearly from the messaging world, and therefore I don't think the prophet, when he delivers that, is delivering any of his own words. Maybe I'm a simpleton, but I think when there's a "Thus says the Lord" formula, we should say these are the words he got. But if there's no "Thus says the Lord" formula, and you've got all these other rhetorical methods that the prophets use to gain their, then I think we might have, the poet in the prophet. We have the presentation chosen by the prophet. The images are coming maybe potentially via a vision, and he has to make sense of it. After all, there's tests for the prophets. There's references to the prophets having to unscramble, you know, and a test where if the prophet sees it and understands what the thing he sees means, like for Jeremiah, it was the shaked, right? It's a shaked, so I can recognize the tree. What's the big deal? But God is shokeding over his people. There was an interpretation step that's what made him pass the test, not just that he could recognize an almond tree, but that he understood by seeing the tree the correlating meaning of God's actions for the people. So those are for me, those are the realm of possibilities. You can read about a lot of this in like books about prophecy written by ancient Near Eastern scholars, like Marty Niskanen and others who are interested in trying to understand the delivery and the role that the prophet makes, that they're not always just the voices, that they are the interpreters, and they're putting out the message in the way that they can get the most, from the audience. So think of it that way too. The prophet is either already seen it, is anticipating that it's happened. With Isaiah, all that's possible. Just a really hot period of history for anybody who studies the Assyrian crisis. We know he lives through all kinds of interesting events that could be underlying some of the prophecies, and they're not organized in such a way as to be chronological. So we remain, um, throwing out the ideas, but we don't really know always exactly what he intends. Okay, so now we have a lachen, another lachen. So two in a row. Joshua, try this.
לכן חרבה שאול נפשה ופערה פיה לבלי חוק וירד הדדה והמונה ושעונה ועלה ועלה בה.
How do you feel? And early stress on it. So I wish we had the top meme for you, so you could see it and be reminded of it. But it happens in the katals and in the yiktals, so it really doesn't matter. If you see the chirug malay, there's a stress back on it. Great
Okay, so
translation.
חרבה.
Yeah.
Therefore Sheol widens its throat and opens its mouth without a limit, and its
Good.
splendor, its crowd, its revelers, and its exultant go down into it.
Isn't it interesting that Sheol is feminine for the Hirkiva, and then it has its own Hadar and its own Hamon and its own Sha'on. So I wonder what that means. Are these regularly thought of as people thought to end up in Sheol? Or is it that we're supposed to have the idea that these people shouldn't end up in Sheol, at least not early? They're happy, they're partying, they're part of a big group. We shouldn't be thinking about Sheol in the same, breath as words like Sha'on and Hadar. But it is. They end up in Sheol. Sheol is personified here as having as wide a mouth as it needs to take them all in. So this pronoun, this repeated pronoun, I think is really fascinating. To me. And I loved your translation. Sheol makes wide its own nefesh. So this is where, the few places where you can see nefesh used, where it starts, physical part of the body. some part of your throat, trachea or throat, so that you get sometimes breathing, which I think is probably the origins of it, but sometimes you'll get some you know uh, consuming through the nefesh. So I don't know if it's just all of that here, or if sometimes there's just mixed images about the the role of the nefesh. But that's where you have to go to think about all the other references to nefesh. You have to really start somewhere. I always do this with vocabulary. Try to start at the very base of it. Don't start with an idiom. Don't start with an image created by a poet. Start with from all the passages that you can come up with. Start with the simplest meanings. That's probably where the word is. And then, you can delight in what is done with the word by various poets and under idiomatic conditions. So, and it's not just poets that create this image of Sheol as a living thing. It's found in narrative, like in Numbers. Sheol is a personified place of death that can open up like a, a hole in the ground, swallow them up, and they're gone forever, sort of thing. This is also true in Akkadian texts where they talk about the underworld. Sheol is our Hebrew word for the underworld. No one else that we have found uses the root Sha'al for their underworld terminology. But there are a couple of phrases in the Bible that use the phrase, a couple of writers that use the phrase land of no return. And that one's super popular in Akkadian. The land of no return is the most popular, but they don't have a single word either for to talk about the underworld as a place of for the dead or for the ghosts or anything like that. But they like to talk about it a lot more than the Hebrew Bible does. So when it does personify death and talk about who it swallows into it, it's of interest to us. How they viewed it, how they thought about the fate of those falling into it. So I don't know, but we're back to the revelers. We're back to those partiers who party day and night, and now we're kind of getting the real lachen, the real outcome is that they all go, all the parties and that. So I'm getting the impression maybe the people who throw the parties are the people who can afford to throw the parties, who maybe the onus is on them to be the ones to teach about God. If I take that premise into the ancient Near East to those parties I was talking about, yeah, somebody has to pay for all the drinks, and it's the wealthy. They take pride in it. They show sponsorship, like they're proud to say, "I hosted this, this holiday, this event." Um, so in the end, what we might be seeing here, just a possibility, is a kind of a criticism of wealthy people who have the potential to teach the masses about God through normal means and wasted their opportunity. And now the masses, perhaps already filing out of Samaria or anticipated by the prophet to be filing out of anywhere since it's the Assyrian crisis. Everybody's threatened at one stage or another. Um, and he's anticipating that they too file away under those conditions. And it strikes me as maybe interesting if we think about the possibility that when in exile, if they don't have a strong connection to their deity, their family, their nation, their community, what happens to them? We try to trace the northern kingdom's inhabitants who were forced to leave Samaria, and we have a hard time tracing them. We hear about them here and there. We know that there are some of the Judeans who end up in exile that are, finding friends in various parts of Mesopotamia due to the earlier exile, and they're making community together. But that's a pretty large population to have, for the most part, lost to assimilation. And so I wonder if the prophet has that in mind, that fear that they will assimilate wherever they are going and lose their identity. It certainly is the concern of the later leaders of the Judean exile. And there I usually argue that with a king in exile and with a shorter lived exile, they had a much better chance of surviving with their identity more intact than seemingly what happens in the 8th century to the northern kingdoms. Population. So I don't know. Does Isaiah have some of that in mind? What happens to the people who leave and are forced to move away, who haven't really developed any bond to their community, to their deity, to their identity? Possibility. I may just be dreaming though. Here's their list of nephesh words. So starting with some sort of throat word, then references to sort of the general area, neck, which includes breath and appetite. Probably breath, I think, is the exact origins of it. But when you're just designating a certain area, lots of potential poetic images of consumption in the nephesh being there. But these are the ones we're most familiar with. People, like when they say, save your nephesh, it's like, it's your life. It's the thing you have in you that keeps you alive, that keeps you animated. And when you die, you don't have a nephesh anymore. That's the biblical use of that word nephesh. So people save their own nephesh, they save the nephesh of other people. So we're all with nephesh and we're alive with nephesh. So we are living things, people with nephesh. And you can just see where this is building. My nephesh is different than your nephesh. So my nephesh wants something really badly. It's a way to say, I have a real strong desire deep down inside. And all of this sort of comes out in the poetic expressions using nephesh. But seems to start with just a part of the body in which you breathe, and when you can't breathe anymore, you don't have that unique thing that made you alive. Now, where this goes after biblical times is something different. So you can consider how in the history of biblical reading and interpretation, the rabbis did something different with nephesh. So my considerations here are only for the word nephesh within the Hebrew Bible and the context of the Hebrew. Okay, Teresa, I think this one's yours. Verse 15.
וישח אדם וישפל איש ועיני גבוהים תשפלנה. So mankind is humbled and man brought low, and the eyes of the proud ones are brought low or humbled.
Yeah, so a lot of low terminology here. By the way, Vaishpal is not Hefil. So there isn't a making low. We were just looking at the word Shephelah, right? But it is a being low. Probably has the same effect, but just note that there is a possibility of Vayashpal, where someone is making someone else low. But notice here, it's just in the G because it's talking about the Ish. A man, probably collective, is low, is in the state of shafal. Same thing back with Vayishach, that humankind. And I think for the prophet to switch away from something like pointing out Israel or maybe pointing to Samaria, but maybe talking about greater devastation or the effect of this as universal or as wide swath of humankind. I do understand it in the context of the Assyrian crisis. It was so devastating over such a long period of time that I don't think anybody had a positive word to say about Assyria for 150 years that lived in Syria and Canaan. They just did not have a reputation that people loved until you get to Menashe, and then you wonder, okay, is he just sucking up to them? But the idea that everybody hates what the Assyrian Empire meant to the peripheral regions. I love the shift to Adam is not just, another way to talk about Ish. It's a way of kind of talking about all humankind is feeling this. And that may be reflective of how people felt about being under the Assyrian thumb, because we certainly see literature just bursting out of these cultures in reaction to it. So, who the eyes of the Gevohim are? Yeah, I just think people that are normally proud, people are normally happy and have something to be proud of are Gavoa. They're high. So these, I don't know who the high ones are, but they should normally be able to hold their head up high. I think eyes at, being able to view someone versus being in the ground, that's often the difference between someone's position. So how many times do we see that people who are in front of the king with their eyes down and the king recognizing them, which means lifting their head or lifting their eyes? So there's a lot of possibilities here, but all I know is it's the opposite. It's the people that would normally have, be able to make eye contact, have pride. So I don't think it's about the prideful ones, so to speak, as much as people who would normally stand tall. Their eyes are low, so they are humbled. They are in that position in front of the king, like we were talking. So great images here, repeating the word shafal twice, and really broadening the the scope to all mankind is in a low state. These are also vayiktols, so let's talk for a minute about how we normally don't see vayiktols in the prophets, and what it follows. So if we go back here, we were dealing with, a katal here that we wondered could be the prophetic use of the katal. Para would probably have to be a katal as well, following that one. So nothing here was indicating anything but just, you know, things that will have happened or have happened. And then you get this. This one we can say will have, you know. So we are in a prefix conjugation verb with a conjunction. Masoretes are telling us it is a vayiktal. We could try to think about if it was something else, if it was really a v plus a yiktol, and the prophet has returned to the potential state, or if it's all happened. So this is what you have to consider when you're going back to Gala and Para. Just consider that it all ends up in two vayiktols, which are then followed by a yiktol. So either we have it wrong, Masoretes have it wrong, or we've got this little bouncing back of time seen as it's viewed by the prophet. Maybe these vayiktols just follow the prophetic use of the katal, and would perpetuate it in sequence. And then why switch back to the yiktol? I mean, these are good questions. Notice our translators don't help us one bit in trying to think through each and every verb. So and it's not easy. It's going to come back around many times over, and you'll be convinced over and over of different things. So be ready for a roller coaster when it comes to verbs in poetry. But at least try it. Always think in terms of how verbs work together. They're not alone. They're working, with other verbs. And if you can connect them and see maybe either a an aesthetic, or an actual rhetorical use, and sometimes you may want to just quibble with how the Masoretes pointed them. That's okay too. If you can, do that without messing with the consonants too much, you're well within your bounds when it comes to scholarship. Okay, Joshua, you get the 16.
ויגבה אדוני צבאות במשפט והאל הקדוש נקדש בצדקה.
Go ahead.
The I was just surprised. I was waiting. Usually I miss an accent somewhere.
No, you didn't miss anything. Sorry,
Uh,
I should have said excellent, Mitsuyan.
Adonai of hosts is exalted in justice, and the holy God is consecrated in righteousness.
Good, good. Is concentrated, or consecrated. I like that. Is consecrated in righteousness. Now, what does that mean? I noticed they say show himself holy. So the difference between your translations is just how you understand the nephal, whether it's passive or reflexive, and who's to say? The first line is just a G, gava, with your real third hey showing up, needing to be marked by the mapik. So that's just he is high, right? It's not he's exalted, it's just he is gava. But ba mishpat strikes me as adverbial. How is he high, or to what extent, or in what way? Some sort of adverbial effect for ba mishpat. Otherwise, I don't really know how to understand it as just prepositional. In the justice, in the judgment, or something like that. I think it's with the decision, something like that. He's made high by the decision making. And then the holy El either makes himself Kadash in the same way by or through tzedakah, or is Kadash in light of tzedakah. I think for me, the G of Gava goes best with how you translate it, sort of a passive of Kadash. They got the similar sounding meanings by actually using a hifil of Gava in the first one. Their translation, he's exalted. To me, that's a cause to, he's making high. Maybe not, especially when they translate is exalted. But anyway, I like the idea of maybe just a simple meaning of gava and then the passive of kadash. I don't think it matters too much. In the end, our mishpat and tzedakah words are back. A pairing that we see many, many, many times over. Last time it was God expected mishpat, remember, and he got some mispach stuff, and he expected tzedakah, but he got tzedakah. Now he's high and separate due to them, which I think is the da'at. Do you think that? When we go back through the poem, the people left bli da'at? If the da'at was what they should have learned about God's poel and his ma'aseh, then I think mishpat and tzedakah are the answers to that big question, if there ever was one, that this is what people should learn about God, and through God's acts is mishpat and tzedakah. The prophets love these two words to summarize in many ways, whether you think it's Merismus-like or Hendiades-like. These two words together just summarize a perfect or a godly world, a world that God intends. Right judgments, making good decisions, and tzedakah, right actions. So I think we have our key here that we read back into the rest of the poem like we have before. We're finally seeing, what the revelers did wrong. Maybe not, maybe we don't know who they are, but that little bit of anonymity is what, in my opinion, keeps the prophets living. They live on. If the prophet had declared this was about Samaria, it would have been about Samaria, and that would have been it. But without that declaration, it remains viable every time there is this kind of concern and maybe mismanagement from people who should know better, or people who have the resources to do better. And then we get the weird part. So we're going to save that for the end. This sort of throws us off, but it might make sense if we put it all together correctly. But Teresa, will you read it for us, please?
וראו פסים כדברם,
So I think that has to be Dovram from the beginning. Dovram.
דוברם,
Yeah.
וחורבות even though there's not a dagesh in the bed?
Yeah, exactly. Some letters don't. So I've tried to track that down too. Would we only know our closed syllable if our Godketfats come out, crisp on the other end of it? And I have found plenty of disputable points. So either we've got it wrong altogether about the Kamatz Katan, or that is a variable that I can't explain yet. There are some people that can explain it though, and I just don't know them. And they're typically like they are rabbinic personnel in certain communities that have they don't put out commentaries or anything like that, but they have poured over the medieval commentaries on the Masoretic or that derive from the Masoretic system. And they almost have an answer for everything. So there are people, they just don't have resources published. That's all I can say. I'd like to know them. I'd like to be able to, to bend their ear. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, וחורבות mechim garim yochelu.
Yeah, Yochelu, there's another uh puzzle form. Normally would say Yiktelu, and there's a vowel there where we weren't expecting it. So stress on it and puzzle, drumming down of your voice. So perfect. Translation.
Yeah, I'm confused. VKU.
Good. I understand.
So, Vekatal, when we look at the verse before and we translate it as present, Vayikba Adonai, so sheep or lambs are grazing
So
as
you're
in
taking it
the
as a vakatal or a
pasture.
katal with conjunction? Which one did you decide? It's R grazing. I
Vekatal,
don't know. Vakatal could do that.
but probably not logical.
Yeah, it's hard
Um,
to it's hard to say. What would be the move from those verbs that we just saw into this one? So, but the prophetic perfect is or prophetic, use of katal is a potential.
so
It will have.
lambs will have grazed as in the pasture.
Mm. Yeah, as in their
Vechorvot
dover. Good.
is like Vechorvot like ruins,
Yeah.
and then Mechim I found something like fat sheep.
Okay. I'm following you. Yeah.
Fat sheep, Garim,
Are they the ruins
the
of the fat
dwellers.
sheep, or in the ruins the fat sheep are doing something? Are you going to treat garim as a participle?
Not really, because participle and then verb, like
Yeah, exactly.
fat
That
sheep
seems
are
unlikely.
dwelling and
Unless it's the
eating.
garim are the ones who are doing the yochelu. Participles can be nouns, they can be verbs, so we have our work cut out for us.
So in
So it looks like their translation, they're doing chorvot mechim as a construct. It would explain why we have a maskatan, because I think you would get like chorba, right? And you might get that with a whole, and we could double check that. I don't know if that word occurs isn't enough to say we even have every form of it, but that would be a place to check. If so, we have maybe if it is normally chom, a clear indicator of a construct, chorvot mechim. So what would that mean? You said you had like rich fatty animals, but what would their devastated places be? Are they always animals? Would they be like they're treating them here as people, I think.
but where do they get
Hmm.
lambs will feed? Because Garim is
I agree. I agree with you. I think
dwellers.
I think they're influenced from the, I believe this is a Septuagint issue. So we're reading Garim. We're wondering, it's from gur. Is it a participle act as a noun or the verb? We're in that mode. The Septuagint, I believe, here translated as kid goats. So they are reading Gedim, not Garim. Well, this could only happen, by the
Oh,
way, in the Aramaic block script that a Resh and a Dalet, like to us, we think the Resh and the Dalet are very similar. And, there is the potential it could be read wrong. Although you're supposed to lift your pen, to get the vertical of the Dalet. So it shouldn't be mistaken. But there are manuscripts that do mistake Resh and Dalet. It can't be that way from the Proto-Hebraic. They are not close enough alike, unless Resh just maybe they forgot the little descending line altogether. You could maybe confuse a Dalet if they forgot completely to put the bottom half of the resh on there. So maybe it could go back before a certain period. But that's a Septuagint reading. So they're either also confused or they have a different manuscript in front of them, different kind of spelling in front of them. It does go better with kivasim. You have to admit that in normal poetry, in the balance between the two lines, we should get something that looks back at kivasim. So the kivasim, that's clear. They're grazing like in their very own dover. So they're grazing somewhere that they didn't before, like their own dover. That maybe sets us up for what the second half also might mean. That these chorvot, or the chorvot, or whoever the mechim are, might be like ruins, like you said. Ruins, the leftovers, where people used to live. And if so, that might be where the kevasim are grazing. They're grazing in the chorvot mechim. But we also have the garim yochelu. So I think the Masoretes they didn't make any changes here. Though that's found in the Septuagint, it's not like the Masoretes are writing in the margins, read Gar, read Gadim. They're not making any commentary at all. So they found an understanding for Gadim. I'll say it that way. I mean, maybe it's not perfect, but they understood it well enough. So how could we understand gur being base word here instead of kavas? Maybe the image of sheep grazing where they shouldn't or where they haven't before or in the place where people used to live. I have that image in my head after the 67 war. There's this palace that King Hussein built north of Jerusalem, and it was half finished. When the war happened and the takeover of that territory by the Israelis took place, and they just left it there. And I would ask, aren't they going to do something to make that look better? And they said, no, no, no. They want it to look like it's an overgrown remnant of a terrible thing that happened in the past. They wanted the sheep and the goats to be all up in the actual, remnants of the palace, and they wanted it to just sit like that and stew on that. And they would take visitors. I mean, it was part of tours. So I have an image like that in my head. I don't know what you have in your head. The Chorvot Mechi, maybe the rich, the people that had all the money at the beginning were able to throw the parties. Is that possible? They're fat too. They're well-fed folks. And if so, then our transition may be already happening. If it's the Chorvot Mechim, our Garim could be just the people who look like Kevasim raising in among the ruins of the former inhabitants. But what's a gur? like a temporary
Someone,
dweller, right?
yeah, who's dwelling somewhere, but as a foreigner.
Yeah, they're foreigners who come in, take over land or come into places where other people have lived. So, even if we don't know the actual history of this text, I think some meaning along those lines might have endured, whether garim is the original intended word. Just because the image is pretty clear. It's not just maybe animals, but people, foreign people even, people coming in from outside. This is an image that Isaiah could have already about Samaria. He could be an image you could get from anywhere when there is an exile of peoples and then new peoples are brought in. The Assyrians had this practice. This is how they controlled their conquered populations. They just moved them around. They take the movers and the shakers, the ones who could do something, who could lead a revolt, and they just moved them. They left the people in the region to work the land, but they moved the people who would have, sort of political stake in the land. And they moved them to new places, keeping them always on their heels, never allowing them to get settled in and become attached. This was a long-standing practice in the Assyrian war machine. That this image works in light of that, I think. So yeah, it's a funny little ending, especially after we had sort of our explanation, our lachen moments are over. We already know what God expects, and we know what the people didn't do right, and we've had the spiritual teaching and the but then he leaves us with this image, and I think it's kind of effective. Ruins being treated like new grazing lands, and people who weren't there before kind of in and out, especially if you had the image of the parties there, like that palace I was telling you about. The palace had such grand potential, and now it's just, overgrown, and animals are in it, and it's not what it was or what it uh, stood for anymore. Best I could do, I think, with the follow-up image. But this is a troublesome passage, really difficult, I think. So well done. So we saw lots of different mechanisms. The word "hoy" is used from lament to prepare for the disaster, so that either the prophet is seeing it as it's going to happen, or it's already happening over here, and he can say, don't be like them. Don't do what they did. Those are both effective strategies. The lachen repetition was wonderful, as that, here and now I'm going to tell you what this is all about, what this is really all about. Is this about drinking and musicians? No, this is about, maybe a use of resources or something. Parallelism all through, a little bit of rare vocabulary and some troublesome potential vocabulary. The double marking of the genitive, I thought, was also an important one to remember, how that happens more in poetry than in prose. And it's just, I should say, it just doesn't happen in prose. Happens in poetry, but they are getting maybe, more bang for their buck by doing it. And it could be something that's very old and resists the, the imposed norms of prose writing. All right. Any questions or thoughts on the prophecy of rebuke as a style of delivering the bad news? So we'll do the consolation image that follows right after next time. I'll see you then. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.